the Roaring Twenties. In the Jared book, it is chapter 10, and there you go, chapter 10, the Roaring Twenties, and we're going to be taking a look at the STAAR. You can see it down here, the STAAR review. This is STAAR review number 7, but it corresponds to chapter 10 in the Jared book. We have all kinds of good images right here. Sacco and Vanzetti over here. The Jazz Age, of course, Tin Pan Alley we discussed the other day. The Wright brothers down here. Prohibition beginning. Flappers there. The assembly line of the Ford Motor Company. Al Capone. And the young lady, I think, is referred to as Betty Bop, Betty Boop. Who really cares? Anyway, the 20s. That's what we're going to delve into. So let's begin. Because I want to keep these videos about 20 to 25 minutes, I'm going to go through, and when I get to that time period, or that period of time in the video, I will stop it. So there really is no rhyme or reason. I'm not going to cover a certain number of slides or get to a certain point. I'm going to talk, and when I finish talking, I get to 20 minutes or so, I'll stop. Okay, so let us talk first. What we have here, our first slide, learning objectives. Take a look at these, and then we will go through, as we go through, we'll answer them. What difficulties did Americans have adjusting to the peace after World War I? What was the 1920s Republican president's approach to laissez-faire government? What made the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, roar? How did cultural values change? That's an important one. And then we talk about what impact did the Harlem Renaissance have upon America. And so these are objectives, things that you should be able to explain in some depth or detail, either orally or on a sheet of paper, a paragraph form, by the time we finish with the slide presentation. All right, the 1920s, we've got a couple of pictures here. It's a grand affair, and you can see young lady, flapper, young man dressed in the style of the day. And of course down here we have what is probably a speakeasy, a place where you could go buy bootleg illegal liquor. And you see some of the people there dancing and drinking. In the background over here you can see what looks like a band playing, probably jazz music. And so the 20s, and we have 4 bullets here we'll take a quick look at. After World War I, America would enter a new age of prosperity. Automobiles, telephones, and electricity making life far better. And so the 1920s brought about a great deal of prosperity. We were able to create or improve upon existing inventions, existing items, and mass produce them and make them available to the general public. Things like automobiles, telephones, and of course having your home electrified became the norm. Second bullet, Americans began focusing on making more money and enjoying themselves. Of course, this is after World War I. This is after the sacrifice of World War I. This is the period of time after the tragedy of World War I. And in that period of time of tragedy, we are going to focus in on making money and enjoying ourselves. Enjoying ourselves, for example, by going to places like that. Third bullet, the 20s will be a period of economic prosperity. Let me clear this up just a little bit. There we go. Economic prosperity and of new cultural values. Some of them we've already discussed, and we will continue to do so as we go through this PowerPoint. But there would be a great deal of economic prosperity across the board. Now, did everyone fully benefit? No. But did the bulk of the country benefit, economically speaking? Yes, they did. Our last bullet, but it didn't start that way. It did not start with a great deal of economic prosperity. It started off the exact opposite. All right, let's go to our next slide. Learning objectives. What were some of the difficulties, most important word here, difficulties Americans faced in adjusting to the peace after World War I? Things we need to look for. the government began to spend less money. Now, again, you're kind of thinking, no, that doesn't happen. At least it doesn't happen here in our day. But yeah, the government did start to spend less money because of the fact that World War I is over. The government spent a boatload of money in World War I buying the goods necessary to fight the war, the uniforms, the bandages, the guns, the bullets, blah, blah, blah. And so the government began to spend a little bit less money. We were also adjusting from a wartime economy, in which the government controlled the economy to a very large extent, to a peacetime economy. Takes us to our second bullet. A recession hit the United States. Recession, level of vocabulary terms, inflation, prices go up, and unemployment goes up as well. So we were facing a recession in the early 1920s. It was relatively short-lived and not overly bad, but it was a recession. People were losing their jobs, partially due to factories cutting back. No longer did they need to mass produce the weapons of war, and they were converting from a wartime economy to a peacetime economy. So jobs were lost. Jobs became extremely difficult to find. America became isolationist. Isolation became what we not only believed in, but what we wanted. And then finally, of course, we have the fear, and it was definitely there, a fear of the spread of communism, the Red Scare. All right, let's move on. The post-war recession. And we have a couple of images here down in the bottom right. It's a little bit difficult probably for you to see, maybe from where you're at. Wanted job. Okay, so here are a couple of men, relatively well-dressed, who are looking for a job, can't find a job. Okay, let's look at the first of our 5 bullets. After World War I, America went into a period of isolationism, refusing to be drawn into Europe's drama or European dramas. And so, as we became isolationist, we did cut back on trade a little bit. And so some of the markets that we had been using or selling things to were closed off. And in some cases, new markets, or rephrase that, new competition for our markets opened up. Once the war was over, many European countries were able to get back and start farming again. And so they were beginning to grow some of the foods that we had been providing to them. And so therefore, that market was closed off. The second bullet, the government stopped spending money on the war effort. Now again, why would we do that? Well, because the war's over. We stopped spending on the war. Why? Because the war is over. Factories shut down to convert to making civilian products. In some cases, we had maybe 2 or 3 shifts working, making the weapons of war, and we no longer needed those 2, 3 shifts. And when I talk about shifts, I'm talking about men who go in for an 8-hour day. And so there's 24 hours in a day, that's 3 8-hour shifts. So you go from, one time to another, 8 hours, then another shift comes in for 8 hours, then the third shift comes in for 8 hours, then the first shift comes back the next day. So the factory is open 24/7, or if it's only 2 shifts, it is open 16 of the 24 hours. Since we no longer need to produce the weapons of war in such large numbers, several of those shifts were either cut down or eliminated completely. Therefore, we are having problems finding jobs. Our fourth bullet, soldiers returning from home, from the war, had a hard time finding work. Part of this is due to, again, we sort of see an image of it right there. Part of this is due to the women and African Americans who had taken jobs, vacancies when the war began. As those men either volunteered or were drafted, their positions were opened and African Americans and women filled them. And of course, you could go add to it. Once they came home, factories were being shut down. So there were fewer jobs available, and you had not only the men who had been working, coming home from the war, leaving the military, but you also had millions of men, millions of African American men and women who were looking for jobs as well. So finding work became more and more difficult, not only for the soldiers returning from war, but also for women who wanted to stay in the workforce and for African Americans who would come northward during the Great Migration. Finally, our last bullet on this page, farmers began to lose money since many of the European markets were now gone. Again, during the war, America was really the only country at war that was not being physically attacked. And so our farmers made a lot of money growing and selling to our allies the things they needed, the foods they needed. Once the war is over, some of those countries started growing their own food, as I mentioned a moment ago, and we lost out on part of that European market. In some cases, that market was gone forever. All right, let's move on to our next one, the Red Scare. And I'm going to be using the green color, the Red Scare. Oh, yeah, that's pretty. Here in the bottom right-hand corner, join the Communist Party, this way to progress. Okay, right here. There was a huge fear of communism. And let's walk through these 4 bullets together. The end of World War I brought new fears to Americans about communists, anarchists, and of course, immigrants. We saw a large number of immigrants coming to America or attempting to come to America from the southern or the eastern part of Europe, what has been referred to as the new immigrants. A couple of chapters ago, we covered that term. And so we were concerned that many of these individuals were bringing with them radical political views like communism or anarchism. And so therefore we, as America as a whole, became somewhat afraid, somewhat fearful, somewhat leery of these new immigrants. The second bullet. In 1917, Russia, led by Vladimir Lenin, had staged a revolution and overthrown the Tsarist government. The Tsar of Russia, Tsar Nicholas, was overthrown by the Communist Party led by Lenin. And instead of setting up a democracy, a form of government that we're familiar with, the country, Russia, became a communist nation. And communism is a political concept in which the people owned and control and share the factors of production. Now that's kind of the book definition, but realistically a communist government is a totalitarian government. The government controls all aspects of life. Now, if you are a member of the Communist Party in good standing, you probably would do okie dokie. If you're part of the ruling elite of the Communist Party, you'd do pretty well. If you weren't, you're in trouble. We'll talk more about communism as we go. Communist Russia threatened to spread their revolution to other nations in Europe. One of the stated goals of Russian communism is world domination, either through overt acts, war, or covert acts, subversion. Our last bullet. When labor strikes hit the United States in 1919, many in the U.S. feared a communist revolution. Many feared a communist revolution taking place here in the United States, which then, of course, gives us the Red Scare. All right, let's move forward. A continuation of the Red Scare. The new fear of communism led the government to violate many individual civil rights. In times of great trouble, in times of calamity, in times of war, oftentimes the government will suspend certain rights. Again, we've talked about how Abraham Lincoln suspended the right of habeas corpus, shut down newspapers who were not on board with his policies. We talked about the Espionage Act of 1917, imprisoning people who spoke out against the draft and the war effort here in America. Those are just a couple examples. Let's take a quick look at the Palmer raids. Oh, that's better. I made the line a little thinner, see how that works out. In 1919, Italian anarchists set up a bomb at the Attorney General's home. The Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer. A bomb was set off at his house. It was just one of a series of attacks across America on that day. The nation demanded that action be taken. And that makes sense. I mean, things have got to be done. We have to be protected. The Attorney General, who was, of course, the guy whose house was attacked, rounded up suspected communists without warrants. And that's a key part. He chose as the person to lead this the head of a new government agency. And they carried out the raids. I think we looked at the numbers and the vocabulary terms. About 6,000 were detained and over 600 were deported. Anyway, and he had these people who were suspected of communism, suspected of being communists or sympathetic to communism, arrested and had them jailed or deported. Often without any evidence, any real evidence of wrongdoing, or without as much evidence as we would really prefer that they have. Okay? And so let us move to our next slide, which will probably be our last slide for this particular video. Here we have, once again, the Red Scare. And we're still talking about violating individual civil rights. Here we have a picture of Sacco and Vanzetti. We've seen this before. These two Italian immigrants were anarchists. They admitted here, in the States, of being communists. They were tried, convicted, and executed of a robbery and a murder. Again, they were executed for the murder, not because of the robbery. It was a robbery that had gone badly, and a couple of people have been killed. And many people believe that they were convicted and executed on what was, at best, flimsy evidence. Evidence that today would not get them convicted. Many people believe that the real reason for their execution was the fact that they were anarchists and communists. And here in the bottom right are some people picketing, protesting, demanding the release of Sacco Vanzetti. Again, what is all this about? Well, this is about the violation of, and many people believe the violation of, individual civil rights because of the fear of of communism spreading to America and what we call the Red Scare. All right, this will be our last one for this particular video. Again, I want to keep these down to 20 to 25 minutes. The rise of nativism. The Red Scare. And you have some images here we'll take a look at in a few moments. Radical anarchists. I don't really know why that word looks that way, kind of weird. So, the rise of nativism. We have the Red Scare. We have radical anarchists. We have bombings by those radical anarchists. We have Sacco and Vanzetti. All these things led to the rise of nativism, a dislike of foreigners. And again, it is probably even stronger than that. You could argue that nativism is a hatred, a deep fear of foreigners, particularly from foreigners from parts of the country or parts of other countries that aren't our bestest buddies, ones that there may have been problems with before. And again, go back a couple of chapters, new immigrants versus old immigrants. Old immigrants being from the western part of Europe, England, France, for example. The new immigrants being from the south and the eastern part of Europe, and they were kind of not overly welcome in many ways. So we have the Red Scare being a huge part of this. So we have the Red Scare. We have radical anarchist bombings, like the one at the home of A. Palmer Mitchell, the Attorney General. And we have the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, leading to a rise of nativism, which of course is this dislike, this fear, possibly even this hatred of foreigners. Well, let's go to our second bullet. Nativists believed that white Protestant Americans were superior to others. And this kind of goes back to the white man's burden, social Darwinism, many of the things that we discussed previously. Next bullet, these nativist attitudes would bring restrictions on immigration. There were at least 3 immigration laws passed in the 1920s, and we mentioned those in the vocabulary terms. Not going to worry about them at this moment. They restricted immigration from certain countries. They restrict immigration in terms of both where we bring them in from and how many we allow into the country. Our final bullet here, in the early 1900s, over 70% of immigrants to the United States, over 70%, were from Eastern and Southern Europe, and these are the ones that we refer to as the new immigrants. We talked about this in Chapter 2 ago. So we have over 70%. And we probably brought in, again, it says the early 1900s. Now, again, what exactly is that? I mean, how many years is that? It doesn't say here. Well, let's just go with the first 3 decades. From 1900 to 1930. Okay, those 30 years. I would say that we brought in tens of millions, or allowed into our nation tens of millions of immigrants, and again, 70% were these new immigrants from these areas that we had a lot of concern about, Eastern and Southern Europe. Now, this middle picture here, this flag, I like it for a couple of reasons. First off, as we take a quick look at it, it reads, Native Americans, be aware of foreign influence. Now, of course, Native Americans is a term that we use today to refer to what we used to call Indians. They're not native, of course. They immigrated, they migrated here just as we have, everybody has. They're not indigenous here. They came across the land bridge from Asia some 40, 50,000 years ago. But at the time that we're discussing, the 1920s, we called them Indians. Today, we often refer to them as Native Americans. Okay? Anyway, the Native Americans that they're referring to in this particular image would be those who are already here, American citizens. And they want you to be aware of foreign influences, which is, again, kind of strange. Why? Because everyone in America is a foreigner. Everybody immigrated here. And in some cases, it was hundreds of years ago. In some cases, it may have been thousands. I mean, it doesn't really matter. There are no indigenous people here in the Americas. So everyone, in a sense, came from someplace else. And they're making a distinction. Again, well, who are we talking about? Well, again, we're talking about nativists. Okay? They're making the distinction between people who are already here and people who want to come in. Okay. We're going to go ahead and stop it at this time. This is the end of our STAAR PowerPoint, and this, of course, is the first part. This is part 1. We're going to end it here. Our second part, will take up where we left off here. Okay.